Welcome to the program today. My name is Mondo Gonzalez, and I have the privilege of talking with retired Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis. Welcome, Bob.
Well, thank you, Mondo.
And there is certainly a lot going on, and our audience is eager to hear your perspective. I mean, you're a geopolitics expert as well. You have a lot of connections around. And kind of just right up front, give us kind of your thoughts. There's a lot of stuff happened over the weekend. Kind of share with us.
Well, now that we're in almost a week of fighting in Ukraine, something that should have been prevented a long time ago had, I think, the U.S. and NATO done more to come to the aid of Zelensky and the people there in Kiev, but we didn't. And so Mr. Putin, created a pretext going into the east, claiming genocide, claiming that there were Nazis that were dominating Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, understand, is a part of the old Russia-Ukraine empire. And one thing that Vladimir Putin is very possessive of. And now, initially, Mr. Putin hoped that he could go in with a light touch, only going after the military, insisting that the government, abandon its claim to sovereignty and surrender and become a neutral country, much like Finland has been for many years. Well, that didn't happen. And so Mr. Putin's light touch has now become a metastasized, almost a cancerous assault on the Ukrainian people. This is almost reminiscent of what they did against the Chechens. And they went in and they used heavy weapons against the civilians, and they slaughtered thousands and thousands. So Mr. Putin's initial effort to just intimidate through military prowess from all sides has failed. And so he's reverted to the old Chechen model of really making them pay a very heavy price. In part because the Ukrainians, who are predominantly a young population that has the intestinal fortitude to stand up against Russian tyranny. And they've been fighting back and fighting back well. Now, it's interesting, since 2014 and the annexation of Crimea by the Russians, that we, the West, have worked closely with the Ukrainians and provided arms such as Javelin anti-tank missiles and Stinger anti-air missiles, and a host of other equipment and training. And so this armed forces today is very different than it was just 7 years ago. And it needs to be understood that the Russians, especially Mr. Putin, is not afraid, I don't think, of employing some level of nuclear engagement. And I very specifically, and hopefully my op-ed will be published shortly, but very specifically, what has happened here is that they have deployed Iskander ballistic missiles all the way into Kaliningrad, which is, of course, an enclave that belongs to Russia, that's in the center of the Baltic, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia countries. And it's nuclear capable. And in their exercises, their annual exercise in next door Belarus, Zapad, it's called ZAPAD, they always practice the deployment and employment of nuclear weapons against NATO countries. And they did this past fall in September with that exercise. And their doctrine is also changed in that they are willing to use nuclear weapons if they perceive that their interests are violated. And so if you get, and it's hard to get into Mr. Putin's mind, but if you try to get into Mr. Putin's mind and watch his behaviors, understand what he says in his public statements, it would appear as if he declares that Ukraine is a sovereign country that belongs to Russia proper, and certainly fits within his geopolitical aims of reuniting the Russia-Ukrainian empire that dates back, obviously, to Nicholas III. So there are a host of very significant strategic things going on. At this point, if Putin throws all his might into taking over Ukraine and we, the West, do not provide sufficient backing to the Ukrainians, which I don't think that we will, then yes, Russia will eventually neuter Ukraine and take it over, and the humanitarian disaster that all of us have been fearing will take place.
You know, it seems that you wrote about this in your 2018 book as it relates to the nuclear, threats. I mean, it seems that, is the West taking those serious enough?
No, not at all. And it's only in the last year or so that people are beginning to realize that what I talked about back in 2018 with Alliance of Evil, the new Cold War with China and Russia, is that all the indicators have been there for some time, and they're just blossoming to full bloom right now. Every single behavior that we're beginning to see on the front pages of our leading papers today, and it is frightening, and it's something that our leadership, beginning with Joe Biden in the White House, must begin to recognize how significant it is.
What's your thoughts on some of the updates from the UN, the meeting of the UN Security Council over the weekend? Do you think anything's going to happen significantly there, or even the General Assembly vote?
Now, I'm not a big fan of the United Nations. I have actually been to the United Nations a number of times as a non-government organization. I went through the process of getting status there. Of course, the Security Council met at the request of the United States and others to consider the Ukraine issue. But because we've given veto authority to the likes of Russia and Moscow, they, of course, didn't take any real action. And the General Assembly, though it tried to have a motion, and it really doesn't accomplish much that is going to help the Ukrainian people, just because the likes of China didn't get along, doesn't agree. They abstained in some of those votes. And interestingly, so did the United Arab Emirates and India. So you have a host of countries in this world that objects to using these international fora to condemn the likes of what I would consider, certainly genocide that we're beginning to see take place in Kharkiv in the east of Ukraine, where they're using large weapons against civilian populations.
This whole situation, Bob, it just reminds us of the need really to be praying for all these things, and as we're watching, prophecy unfold. And I mean, because one of the things that we like to do is to keep people educated, and one of the ways that we do that here is to address these topics that are going on worldwide through our magazine. So we'll be right back.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm Bob Ulrich, Gary Stearman's partner and the co-founder of Prophecy Watchers. I would love to tell you how you can become a subscriber to our wonderful prophecy magazine, creatively named The Prophecy Watcher. And ready for this? How you can get 8 powerful prophecy DVDs as a free bonus for subscribing today. Every day, the ancient prophecies of the Bible get more and more exciting as we watch world events come into perfect alignment with the words of the ancient prophets. It's a one-of-a-kind publication full of articles that will make you a Bible prophecy expert and prepare you for the future. We have a very special subscription offer for you today. For your gift of $50 or more to support the worldwide outreach of Prophecy Watchers, you can subscribe to either the digital version or the print version of our magazine. And here's the best part. In addition to receiving 12 monthly issues of the magazine, this offer comes with a fantastic bonus: 8 DVDs from some of the leading prophecy experts in the world today. 8 DVDs plus 12 issues of the magazine represents a $200 value, but it's available today for your gift of just $50 or more to support the work of Prophecy Watchers. This offer is available anywhere in the USA and will ship both the magazine and the DVDs absolutely free. Don't wait or hesitate. Call the toll-free number on your screen or visit our online bookstore at prophecywatchers.tv to take advantage of this limited time offer. Looking at the future through the lens of Bible prophecy is the entire focus of this ministry. We're motivated like never before by our desire to tell the world that Jesus is the only answer for these troubling times. And we do believe that He's coming back very soon, just as He promised. Partner with us today. Help us take God's message of salvation through Jesus Christ to the whole world.
You know, Bob, picking up where we left off, one of the things that I really want to get your thoughts on is that these truce talks up in Belarus. You know, people are going in there, the leaders are coming in. What's your thoughts on the reality or the realism of whether these will be effective or not? Is it just for show?
Well, Lysenko, who is the president, of Belarus, encouraged Zelensky to meet, send delegations to their common border in the north, actually near Chernobyl, the famous nuclear reactor that is still a bit warm. When they met, they disagreed mostly. They talked about ceasefire. They talked about, of course, the Russian insistence that they become a neutral country and demilitarize, which, of course, is part of what Putin has been pressing Ukraine to do and the West. At least they're meeting. It's a start. They haven't met a second time. They probably will, but it will be under different conditions because the initial meeting was preceded by 2 days of diminished hostilities. Well, in the last day or so, the hostilities has radically increased. And so the blood has been flowing on many Ukrainian streets. And as that increases, the demands of the people in the Kremlin will increase. And therefore, talks of a ceasefire will only come if there's some sort of accommodation on demilitarizing and surrendering to the likes of Vladimir Putin.
You know, you wrote a book in 2017 on really the deep state. And, we get a lot of emails in and our audience is just, having a difficult time trying to separate the propaganda and the fake videos and the fake pictures. What's your thoughts on really the backside of the deep state being involved? Who's on whose side here? How's the deep state potentially involved in this, conflagration?
Well, the deep state is really about globalization, the agenda that is being pressed, not only within our own government and the layers of influencers like the Chinese on our government, but also maligned actors within our government agencies. And the globalists tend to have a very different agenda than you and I. They seek to enrich themselves and their powers. At the same time, they want to rob us of our sovereignty and bring us under one world government. They ultimately believe that, and they publicize those views. So I believe, for the most part, because of over 50 years here in Washington, that this is really a spiritual war, that there's a very serious demonic influence within government, not only our government, but also more broadly. And I cover some of that in the deeper state, but there are certain things that I still haven't gone public with because of my personal experience.
What's your thought as it relates to, I've been reading about, really the role of Turkey, that, they've been trying to blockade some of the ships. Is that gonna really cause issues there between the two countries? I mean, they've been relative allies for the most part. What's your thoughts on that whole development?
Well, Erdogan, the president of Turkey, the Turks have traditionally not been friendly with the Russians. You can talk about Gog and Magog, but the Turks don't like the Russians don't like the Turks. But sometimes out of mutual purposes, they do collaborate. And we saw some of that in the likes of Syria today, whereas there are Russian fighters, there are Russian naval vessels and aircraft, and a lot of soldiers that are still in Syria helping to bolster up Bashar Assad. And of course, that really rubs the likes of Erdogan somewhat raw because they would really like to dominate all of Syria, and certainly they don't like the Kurds in the east. So you have a host of conflicting issues going on here. But the fact that the Turkey, which is of course a NATO member, has threatened to close the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, which is of course the passage from the Med into the Black Sea, is a pretty strong statement. Now, whether or not they follow through with that and block Russian combat vessels from circumventing that or going through that particular waterway, we'll have to wait and see. But it is controlled by the Turks, and it's a significant plus to NATO that they have aligned themselves appropriately, as the alliance is, to help a country in distress. And after all, it was the Turks that sent drones, armed drones to the Ukrainians that, to this point, have demonstrated effectiveness against Russian armor.
So, Bob, let's talk a little bit about the European Union request that Zelensky made. I mean, do you think there's any reality of this happening? He was kind of asking for a fast track application and approval, but this doesn't seem very probable. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, he obviously wants EU membership because of all the goodies that comes with that, the trade, et cetera. Of course, that would be totally unacceptable to Vladimir Putin. Anything that aligns Ukraine with the West, and the EU would be totally rejected by Putin, much less NATO membership. So I can understand that. They've been pursuing it for some time. And even though Zelensky's speech was well received at the European congregation, I don't think that that's even a possibility at this point.
Yeah. So, we see some of this, obviously even the propaganda or the attempts to try to save face on everybody's side, but, stuff like that, you're like, it's just political, right? I mean, there's no chance really of that happening in a fast track situation.
No, there really isn't. Even though the EU is incredibly sympathetic with the humanitarian disaster happening across all of Ukraine, and of course the flow of Ukrainians into Poland, Romania, and eventually elsewhere throughout Europe, they just aren't going to make that move just because of the risk of further provoking and antagonizing Putin. Putin's in a corner. And given the recent statements about his perhaps mental health, suggests that we better be careful.
Yeah, I was reading as well that really the international attempts, various organizations, the international athletes, they're trying to go and forbid any athletes from participating in any of the world events, FIFA, soccer, all that stuff, trying to isolate Russia. I mean, do any of these things, do they really think, it's maybe right or wrong, whatever, but Putin's not going to allow that really to influence him?
Probably not. However, what we have seen is a lot of internal disruption, demonstrations. And of course, the Russian police have arrested thousands of protesters. One thing that I saw, I was in the Soviet Union in 1982, and I saw returning soldiers, Russian soldiers from Afghanistan. And I became mindful at the time of some came back in body bags, and that ultimately persuaded the Russian mothers to really join the protest because they didn't want to see their sons dead in a faraway war. Well, what's happened now is very, very interesting, and that is that a lot of Russians, many Russians, consider the Ukrainians, just like Putin, part of their country. And so sending Russian conscripts, which is mostly his army, to kill Ukrainians, family members, seems to be terribly objectionable to a vast majority of the Russian people who, by even certainly polling that I'm aware of suggests that this is a very delicate situation. The other thing is that under Mr. Putin's leadership, they've really cut back on the fertility rate of the Russian population. It's a declining population. And so you have fewer sons today in a lot of the families around Russia. And so when some of those sons who were conscripts are killed and they return in body bags, if at all, then that's going to provoke more consternation on the part of the general population. In fact, I think Mr. Putin is somewhat sensitive to that because we've seen evidence of mobile crematoriums moving forward. So, it could be that they aren't going to ship body bags back. They're just going to ship urns of ashes, if at all.
There's been, again, hard to verify some of it, but the stories are that there's so many of these conscripts that are surrendering. They're coming in, they're maybe untrained or lack of full training. What have you heard about that?
Well, that's fairly typical of any army that has conscripts. Of course, the United States Army hasn't had conscripts since the early 70s. And there's a radical difference between a conscript military and a professional military. And it really, demonstrates itself in terms of the willingness to fight and to die for one's country. And it would appear the preliminary reports about some of these conscripts that they aren't well trained. They are engaged in fighting against a nation of Ukrainians that are willing to die for the freedoms that they've enjoyed for decades now. And that these conscripts are also dying at a very rapid rate. And so domestically, because much of the carnage is not being reported directly to the Russian moms and dads, that it will seep in through other means. You can only control the internet and access and control the wavelengths so long, much as I was accustomed to during the old Soviet era. Now, of course, they jammed radio broadcast into the Soviet Union. There wasn't anything really like a internet. And so if you couldn't get signals in, then you're at the mercy of whatever the propaganda was that was spewing out of the Kremlin. And that's precisely what they're trying to control. But in today's world, it's becoming more difficult. So I suspect the domestic turbulence within Russia will continue to boil, and it could boil over. And we've seen protests over the last couple of decades in that country that are pretty daunting.
Yeah. One last thought, if you will, some of the emails that are coming in, they're trying to keep us involved and informed, but you have this theory that you have Putin is the good guy coming into Ukraine, trying to overrule the deep state that's there and stop the sex trafficking and all the corruption that we know with Biden and other things. Any background or truth to any of that from your perspective?
Well, one of the reasons that Ukraine is not a NATO member or a EU member is because there is widespread corruption. We have sex trafficking in the United States. They do as well. We have pornography in the United States. They do as well. Everybody that's listened to the news knows that Hunter Biden was on the take from, the Ukrainian oligarchs that oversaw the shipment of energy from Russia. And so, yes, they have issues. Now, the idea that the only one of two Jewish leaders in the world, Zelensky, and the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, is a Nazi, is beyond the pale. He's not a Nazi. Are there different groups in Ukraine that are disruptive? Certainly. Every country has that. But this is just the spin that the propagandists for the GRU, the intelligence service of Vladimir Putin, are spinning in the international and the national news for their own, purposes.
Bob has been extremely helpful over the last few years in providing information. I mean, he's an expert in politics, geopolitics, and he's written about a book every year. And so these books are so helpful because he takes into account the spiritual element as well. So we're going to take a little break here. You can see how you can stay informed.
As always, Prophecy Watchers enjoys bringing you the experts, men who can be trusted to speak the truth with biblical discernment. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis, who will be one of the featured speakers at our upcoming Homeward Bound Prophecy Conference in Colorado Springs, has been warning Americans about the rising threats coming from Russia and China for years now. He is a voice that can be trusted. His long military career and contacts in government and the military has given him insights far beyond internet rumors. Bob has also written 3 excellent books that should be required reading for every American: Alliance of Evil, The Deeper State, and Give Me Liberty, Not Marxism have flown under the radar for years, but suddenly, based on what we see happening today, appear to be highly prophetic. We've packaged up all 3 of these insightful books into what we're calling the Russian, China, and Ukraine package, and are making them available for your gift of $60 or more to support the work of Prophecy Watchers. We want to continue bringing you the experts and taking our television programs and important interviews to the whole world. We've added a very special free bonus to this collection of Bob's 3 books. It's a brand new 3-hour DVD from Mondo Gonzalez and Bill Salas, Ezekiel 38, When God Defends Israel, perhaps the most comprehensive study ever done on Ezekiel 38 and 39 and the coming battle of Gog and Magog. If you want to see the future through the eyes of the biblical prophets, this 3-hour study will make you an expert on what's happening in our world today. Just call the toll-free number on your screen 24/7 and we'll send you Bob's 3 books and the 3 bonus DVDs from Mondo and Bill on the Gog and Magog invasion of the Promised Land with free shipping included. Based on current events, this end times attack on Israel seems to be getting a little closer every day. As always, you can visit our website, online bookstore, and our video streaming site at prophecywatchers.tv, where you can place your order today. Thanks for supporting our ministry. Together, we are making a difference.
Well, I really hope that you take advantage of that offer because I have been blessed by reading and staying up to date with Bob's work. Also, for this television audience, we want to remind you that, you can find us as well on our app. So you can go to prophecywatchers.com. We're on Roku, we're on YouTube, we're on Rumble. So we have a variety of other avenues where you can stay up to date on the things that we're covering really on a daily basis, in addition to the television program. So Bob, anyways, I want to appreciate your time today. As always, coming and chatting with us and keeping us informed.
My pleasure. Like to do it anytime.
Again, thank you for watching. We will continue to keep you updated. We appreciate your prayers and support for our ministry, and we will see you next time.